Every log that hits your SIM is like a heartbeat. A firewall deny, an authentication event, a process spawning on an endpoint. Altogether, these events form the pulse of your environment, a proof that your detection capability is alive. But here's what makes telemetry health difficult. You're not watching one heartbeat, you're potentially watching hundreds of thousands of them simultaneously, all day, every day. And oftentimes the failure you're trying to catch is incredibly subtle. It's a single beat that minorly changed shape or briefly stopped while everything else kept going normally. Your dashboards look fine, your SIM is running, the vast majority of logs are reviving and parsing without issue. But somewhere in that volume, one source has changed. A formatting change broke a parser, or in the worst case, an attacker deliberately disabled a log source to blind you to their movement. You're not going to get an alert for that. Rules need content to trigger on. The absence of data won't trigger a detection. All you get is a silent failure. It's a nightmare scenario. Your rules were right, your tuning was solid, the pipeline just silently stopped delivering, and you had no idea. Telemetry health sits underneath everything else in your detection program. All the logic, coverage work, and tuning that you've built upon depends on logs arriving correctly and landing where your rules can reach them. When that assumption breaks, and breaks silently, there's often no warning. You just start missing things. At RSA this year, I sat down with Nir Loya Dahan from Fig Security to talk about this exact problem. What breaks, why problems are so hard to spot, and what it actually takes to keep that pulse intact across an enterprise environment. As a quick note, this episode was made possible with sponsorship by Fig Security, so thanks to Nir and the Fig team for helping bring this content to the Blueprint audience. Okay, let's get into it. Nir, thank you so much for sitting down with me in your busy schedule during RSA to talk about my favorite topic, security operations, and how we can make it better over time. Can we start off with a quick introduction to yourself and the problem you're working on?
Amazing. Thank you for coming over.
Yeah,
and so quickly introduce myself. I'm Nir. I'm co-founder and CPO at Fig. Before Fig, I was the VP of product for Simulate, which is a breach and attack simulation company. And before that, I used to work for a few years for Simplify, the SOAR vendor, before it got acquired by Google, in different product roles. And that's it, I guess.
And so what is the problem that you're working on now at Fig?
Yeah, so the problem that we're working on at Fig is the fact that the security operations infrastructure and tech stack is one of the most complex ones, and for a very good reason, because it holds all of the security flows in the entire organization, yet security engineering today don't have control over the efficacy and the resilience of this infrastructure. And the fact is, any change that happens in this infrastructure, be it because of drift that happens upstream or any change that they're pushing into production, is breaking detection and response flows and creating blind spots all the time. And we're coming to fix that. We're finding and fixing silent failures and broken security flows that are affecting the SOC from detecting and responding to threats.
Excellent. That is a real problem that a lot of people are going to run into at some point, whether they realize it or not, right? And one of the themes I've seen just walking around RSA, the clear theme is agentic SOC, right? Having things run themselves, working through triage and things like that. But before all of that can work, you have to make sure you're actually getting good data, right?
100%. And from what we're seeing, there's two big motions that happen today in around SOC modernization, which one, new players are coming into this space from the data infrastructure perspective. For the first time in many years, a cheaper, better, faster SOC is within reach, right? Obviously, with AI, agentic AI coming into the SOC, which is an amazing use case, but it also holds a challenge from the standpoint of AI is amazing. AI can be a great tool. If it runs on a broken data infrastructure, it's only going to break things faster.
Yes.
So ahead of implementing AI, you need to make sure your data foundation, in our case, the security data foundation, is rock solid.
And so what does a rock solid security data foundation look like?
Yeah, so let me maybe start talking about how the foundation looks like today. And with sock modernization, you can see in more places where this foundation is split between different vendors, I'd say. And when you come to think about it, all of the data, all the security data in the organization find its way into the data pipelines, where data is routed, ingested, potentially transformed, and moved into the data lake or SIM, or sometimes it's the SIM's own ingestion tools that are flowing data into it. There, the data is being stored, potentially altered, modified to be available for detection purposes. Sometimes parsing and normalizing the data can happen before that. It could happen after the data is being saved. Different solutions are running schema on read. Some solutions are running schema on write, like enforcing schema ahead of ingestion, but all are configurable, obviously. And two other very important pieces that allow detection engineers to consolidate detection logics and have robust detection logics is around information models. Very common in Splunk, obviously, in Sentinel, other solutions where you don't need to write different detection rules for each of your tool. You have an information model that allows the engineer, the detection engineer, to create a single logic. And then however the data is changing between different types of tools, the information logic normalizes for that and allow you to ask those kind of questions. And on the other hand, you have all the enrichment pipelines that are also feeding into your detection logic, coming in both like natively from those solutions, but also fed by the organization, by that detection engineer, be it your lookups, your reference tables, your threat intelligence flows, your CMDBs, whatever additional data that is being used for enrichment, either within the detection itself or within the pipeline. And so the data that gets to be available for the detection engineer might be completely different in structure, different in patterns than how it originally came out of the source. And being aware of all of the changes that the data is going through all the different phases is super crucial and super important for a detection engineer to understand.
Yeah. There's that's one thing I cover in class, right? It's like the data you're seeing in your SIM might have completely different fields than the things that if you go look at the data on the source, and that's if you're getting it at all, right? So it's not just like the magic box that you drop an agent and everything is just perfect and shows up, right? There's a lot of decisions and intentionality that a detection engineer or SIM engineer has to think about along the way, right? Where am I deploying these agents? How are they getting there? What's happening in the process? Could you talk a little bit in more detail about the different stops from data being generated on the endpoint all the way to where it's actually being looked at by a detection?
Yeah, for sure. So let's take a classic example. Let's look at Windows event logs, right? So there are various types of logs that are flowing from different machines in the organization. Sometimes they go through different aggregation spots and forwarders within the organizations. In different technologies have different ways of aggregating those logs. Some organizations would rather just shoot the data straight from the source to the data lake or SIM layer. Some goes through data pipelines to reduce the sizes, the breadth and depth of those logs. We often see a lot of cost optimization initiatives that are being run by data engineers in the organization to consolidate and filter out the data that is considered by them important for detection. Now, what is important for detection? That's a big question.
Yes.
Oftentimes, already at this ingestion phase, and oftentimes where the teams, detection engineering and security data engineering, are not the same team, sometimes there's miscommunication in terms of what do I ingest, how do I ingest it, what do I filter out, how do I normalize and deduplicate, and how does that corresponds with what my detections are doing, what are they looking for, how does a post alert hunting looks like, and where can I find the data that I need. And already this ingestion phase, there might be challenges we can talk about later on. We can talk about what kind of challenges do we see. Later on, after the ingestion, obviously it needs to be routed to a specific place where the data is being saved. And in this point in time, two main approaches are either enforce schema upon writing that log into it. Some solutions allow it, but do not enforce it. Some solutions are enforcing it, and sometimes it really requires a lot of parsing work already at the ingestion phase. And that's an interesting part too, that we also identify a lot of challenges, obviously, all the way to data being stored. Now, once the data is being stored and it's out there, the question is, how do I query it?
Right.
Sometimes, mostly in the schema on write, obviously, the data is already being structured and available for querying. When the schema is upon read, well, I just push the data in there. I can either parse it before or not parse it at all. Just can push it there, and the entire parsing process happens upon the query itself. I can look at the data in different states. I can look at the data as it is coming into where it's saved. But when I want to query it, I look at the data as it's after the parsing process. And this is where the process that I mentioned, the parsing, the extraction, the aliasing, the evaluations, and different calculations that are being held on top of the data before it's being available to being queried. That's where you can either use information model to query it or query it directly, but you're still going to see the data after it's being parsed and evaluated. There's the enrichment part where it adds on additional data on top of the either adds additional data on top of the log itself. A great example would be event types and tags on Splunk, which is pretty straightforward. Sometimes really affect the detection logic in a way, and sometimes a lot of the problems could be at that area alone. And it can also be around the enrichment that doesn't revolve around the log itself. Like, I want to correlate whatever is in the log within a specific field, within a specific format, to something that's in a lookup or in a reference table, and it needs to be matched in a way, in pattern, in value, in field, whatever. And following that, and like those kind of stops along the way, we get to the detection. Detection, when I'm saying detection, obviously, it's not just the detection itself, it's also the query that you want to run against the data, etc. We haven't even talked about automation. From my past at Simplify, we used to see all the time, a lot of organizations are moving to use SOAR as a case management.
Yes.
That runs automations. And this is kind of like the next stop. An alert has triggered. Now it moves into the SOAR, and the playbook is triggered based on that alert. That alert needs to be structured in a specific way, needs to have data in a specific format in order for the playbook to refer to the data in it, which is another stop to it.
Yeah, so there's all these different things happening to a log as it goes through this entire process,
Yes.
right? And at any stage, right, whether it's being collected or not, whether it's being enriched or not, there's all these fields that exist inherently, and then the ones that you might add on later, and then there's the normalization and the categorization, tags you might apply, right? All of that stuff introduces complexity and potentially unpredictability, right, for your log, and then you have a detection that is organized and written to look at one of those fields, hoping that it will be there, right?
Yep.
Where along those pipelines, along that entire pipeline, do things start to go wrong or most commonly go wrong?
Yeah. So it starts with the very basic stuff. Like every piece of that pipeline is a configurable object. Mm-hmm. You can configure ingestion, you can configure parsing, configure data model enrichment, configure storage or routing, and bad references happen all the time. You'd be surprised by the amount of times a typo in the reference for an index or a table or a specific source type. I think I have a specific lookup, and it doesn't there. Somebody deleted it. Somebody changed the name of the lookup, and or I'm looking at data that should come from a specific parser where it's disabled. Those are kind of like very basic stuff that happens all the time because just the environment is changing, and it's important. That's kind of like the basics of having the pipes ready. Okay, if you don't have a piece of the pipe, data can flow.
Right.
The second thing that we see oftentimes is the data flow. Like you'd expect data to be coming from a specific source that you're monitoring. Oftentimes, this is where we see a lot of organizations do have some basic controls over monitoring whether data is flowing or not from a specific source. A big challenge is look not just at the source level, but at the schema level, right? A source can generate a lot of different types of logs, right? Even if you're seeing data keeps on streaming, if you don't look at the different logs and log types and different schemas coming in from that source, you might have a false sense of security where data is flowing, everything is okay, but specific types of logs aren't flowing because some configuration happened at the source level because of some filtering at the pipeline level that happened because somebody wanted to save some money or because parsing errors broke the pipeline over at the SIM or whatever. This is kind of like another area that can go wrong. The third area, which is I think the most prone to error area, is around schema and pattern issues. Can't tell you how many times we've seen some upstream change happen in IT. Somebody changed the structure of the value within a username field coming in from Active Directory, and all of a sudden 7 detections broke. Why? Because you look at this pattern and the data is flowing in another pattern. And it's not like you're going to have an error somewhere. It's just the detection is not going to work. It's not going to trigger. Changes in schematic structure of the log itself. That often happens. By the way, also in this area, we do see organizations implementing some level of enforcement to monitor schema health in a way. We don't see it as often as we would like to see. Where we do see it, this is a major area for the sense of resilience, right? I'm not just looking at the data flow. I'm looking that everything that I need from that source is getting there. Everything I need for detection is getting there. So those are additional places that we see detections break for. And the other areas around meta configuration. I think what I'm going to say right now, timestamps and timeframes, people at home are going to I think alerts from the future, misconfigured timestamps and timeframes that doesn't make sense are a very big source for headaches for a lot of detection engineers, where oftentimes automatic extractions that happen usually in different parts of the flow. Sometimes data sources that weren't configured, not just configured, misconfigured, just were not configured in the first place, and the default wasn't good enough. And this is an area where we see a lot of issues happening. It's hard to keep track of those, like keep track of latency, keep track of timeframes, keep track of the right mapping. When you look at a log from CrowdStrike or from any EDR or whatever, you can see 7 different timestamps right there, and mapping the right ones and know that it comes with the right format and matches your detection logic is a big challenge because you need to do it anywhere.
Yeah. One of the things I'm thinking, I have to be careful not to give this away, but there is a SANS class where there is a CTF. And in that CTF, one of the things the author of that CTF did to be very sneaky was on an endpoint, break into it, set the system clock back like 20 years, and then do the bad thing, which then the log goes in saying it happened 20 years ago, and then the detection fails, right? Because it was relying on what the log said the timestamp was versus the actual recorded time of receiving the log, right? Which is somewhat specific to that setup, but certainly those kind of games can be played as well, right?
100%, 100%. And I tell you, moreover, oftentimes playing with the time frame of the detection itself, like earliest to latest, and then playing around latency to see whether you're going to miss stuff or not. Those are stuff that's happening all the time. We had a few clients actually. We created it to see if they're gonna identify it, if they're getting like lower alert rate and stuff like that. And this is just one exercise, but it is a super important exercise because it's a very big source for alerting failure. Right. And by the way, not just that, sometimes like misconfiguration at the ingestion level, like looking at like monitoring the performance of the different spots along the way, whether your forwarder is sitting on a machine that is up running, not grinding CPU, in a way, anything that could affect the ingestion and correlation downstream, that is starting from that second layer. If the first layer is the data source itself, the second layer is going to be the ingestion, which can be super complex. Only at the infrastructure level and the performance level that could affect latency and time frame issues downstream. So this is what I also call the meta configuration itself. Just to give you an example, somebody changed an ingestion setting to limit amount of events that are flowing per minute. And all of a sudden there was a crazy drop in specific types of logs because it got to the maximum every time.
Oh yeah.
And like we've been seeing, like it was a few years ago, one of the SOCs that we were working with, and they didn't understand why data is dropping, and because they haven't monitored it. And some engineer, after like working a week to identify kind of different, like walking across like walking backwards across the pipeline to identify, okay, this small misconfiguration at this specific node within this very crazy graph just was misconfigured.
Yeah, crazy stuff like that, right? And the tracing it back becomes just a whole nightmare, let alone right when attackers do it. Have you ever seen other like attacks that involve turning off log sources and relying on the teams not seeing it?
So I actually haven't. I had a very interesting conversation about it with my CTO, Roy, which has a very extensive offensive security background. And we're talking about this notion of whether attackers would use, would try to misconfigure security operations infrastructure to allow attacks to happen. And he had a saying, the good ones might be doing it, the very good ones wouldn't be caught. So they don't even need to do anything there.
Yeah, interesting.
So that was kind of interesting to think about it. I guess because the problems are known to all, right? And I guess I won't be surprised if somebody would have used this kind of knowledge to identify how they can either bombard or alter how they're working in order to impact how the blue team's SOC is going to be able to respond to threat. But that's kind of like two different approaches around that.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier the idea of looking at your schema health, right, and things like that. For those who are listening that may not be doing really anything around that, what are some of the actual methods that people use to just look at the data and say, like, has anything changed here that are implementable by, largely anybody?
Yeah. So first and foremost, building mechanisms for enforcing some of the schema requirements coming in from the detections. Requires some engineering work, obviously, but even starting with that, implementing those kind of controls in whatever SIEM you're using, whatever data lake that you're using, that's already a very good step towards that, security operations resilience. In a way, it starts by identifying what do you use in your detections, what kind of data sources, what kind of fields, what kind of conditions you're using, and then break it backwards to what are the fields that should be getting and parsed and flowing correctly into the SIEM itself. Yeah. That's a very important and first step towards towards being sure about your detections, obviously. And we've seen that happen in different organizations. I would say that, again, because it can require a lot of some engineering work to put this, I would focus tomorrow morning on the critical detections, okay, and critical sources that those detections rely on. Even that is going to be a very important step.
Yeah. So just being aware of, right, your most critical, like the source it's coming from, what's happening to it along the way, the actual fields that are put in, and then having some kind of continuous check to ensure that nothing of that changes over time.
Yeah, I would even say that in some cases, in some tools, you can actually put some controls to enforce schemas in different ways. It's a double-edged sword because it needs some coordination today when you build it yourself on your SIEM. It needs some coordination between the controls that you put in and the detections. If tomorrow morning you're going to update your detection, you're going to need to make sure you update those controls as well, right. Obviously. But again, starting with the most critical ones is a very important step already.
Yeah, starting with the priorities and making sure your biggest things at least are in place, and then kind of working your way down the list is the approach I'm always pushing on that as well. On the schema side, right? How often do schemas change for like security products?
So it differs. I would say that most vendors do understand that what they get out of their product affect detection and response down the line. And the thing is that you don't necessarily know when, right? And we had this thing that we saw with the client that told us that one of the big vendors, without any names mentioning, change a schema into like a nested field within one of the logs, and it was one change, a very slight one, by the way, but it broke parsing for specific flows, and 7 or 8 detections from their detection array around for like looking at this source weren't triggering for it was 2 months, and somebody at the SOC was like, "Hey, it's odd. I haven't seen those rule trigger. It's funny because those rule were generating false positives every every now and then, but all of a sudden it's completely silent." And they were like, "Okay, let's look into it." They spend around 2 weeks trying to figure out what exactly was broken because they've seen data flowing, but the rules weren't triggering, and they identified this slight change that broke extraction and evaluation of a specific field that those specific detections were relying on.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily about how often does it happen, but when it happens, that's something that could, in this case, it really affected their ability to respond to threats. Now, in solutions that are being managed internally within the organization, where schema can change based off internal configurations, this is something that happens a bit more often, I'd say, because it's not a vendor that's very cautious of every change.
Yeah.
But the internal stakeholders, like IT, again, that's the example with the Active Directory. IT changes configurations often. Yep. For internal logging for internal products, happens a lot for tech companies and stuff like that. This is happening way more often because the backend engineer just changes something, they don't even know it's being utilized downstream, but they change it, and this breaks much more often. This is where, by the way, where a lot of organizations are implementing some level of schema validation. This is where we've kind of seen it.
Yeah. I think of, a number of different scenarios there. I've seen definitely like cloud products where there's a whole bunch of different services and they all have a username field, but like even within the platform itself, right? Username from one service might be a different format from username from another one. And you kind of hope your vendor is taking care of that to some extent. Maybe that's a question, right? Vendors and their information models, right? To some extent should be on top of that. But do you find that there is any kind of gaps or lag in vendor changes a thing, and then the information schema and like the transform of that change doesn't catch up?
So it differs. Again, there are some vendors who are more aware of it and more try to solve for it. But the reality is, security engineers can be on top of everything, can be on top of every slight change in the API documentation, additional versioning, and they definitely can be on top of the changes that happen within the data itself in that structure. And we often see that gap. Something like they kind of don't have a reason to suspect a change, but when it happens, they're not aware of it, and it kind of affect the environment. So there's definitely a gap. It changes in that time frame, but still yet a gap. Even with it, and that's a good point that you're raising about even within kind of like the same vendor, because those solutions, you mentioned cloud providers, kind of like IT solutions, cloud solutions are being managed by either IT or DevOps or whatever, but it's very, very much configurable. I can decide what do I want to use, what kind of conventions do I want to use. If I'm changing conventions in specific services in that side of the cloud versus somebody else in another side of the cloud, often there's not a lot of communications or coordination. Right. A lot of times we talk with detection engineering teams that are saying, I'm not exposed to any change management log that happen in different parts of the organization. And oftentimes you just need to handle the coincidence. Obviously the ideal state would be an open communication about change management and transparency around it, being realistic. Detection engineering and security data engineering need to have control on their own rather than hoping that somebody's going to update them if something changes. Right. Because at the end of the day, if an alert isn't triggering, into the security side.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing to notice, right? It's like it's easy to tell when you write a detection rule that is bad and it fires off a million false positives and you explode your queue, clear signal there. But it's when things disappear, right, that's where you say, it's quiet, a little too quiet, right?
Yeah. Nobody, like we have the saying, nobody knows if an alert wasn't triggered for 3 months because there was secure for 3 months or because something was broken.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like immediately makes sense because, hey, we've been there.
Yeah. Yep. And so resilience is the thing we're getting to here, right? And every SOC needs that, like, what can be pushed and changed and modified? How can the environment drift and how much can happen before something actually breaks? What does a SOC that is doing this really, really well look at, and how do they kind of maybe measure and approach building that resilience?
Yeah. So to your point about resilience, there's a lot of discussions these days about resilience because, that's a new focus, right? Mm-hmm. Risk kind of shifted. Mm-hmm. The discussion about risk. Resilience has a lot into it, but oftentimes when you refer to resilience, you talk about attack resilience. Do I have all the controls in place to make sure an attacker can attack me? But you can't really talk about cyber resilience without talking about operational resilience. Once an attacker did their own thing, now how do I respond, remediate, contain, recover, whatever, in the most efficient way? Mm-hmm. And when you come to think about it, the security operations infrastructure is what allows detecting and responding in the fastest, most efficient way. And so kind of like three areas, like three main questions, I'd say organizations, in our opinion, should ask themselves about resilience is around the security operations resilience is first, how do I know, how do I understand if our detections, what do we know how to respond to, is fully operational right now, and alerting properly and have everything that we need it to have. That's an important question to ask. The second question, and by the way, the first question is around the main measurement is how many of my detections are working right now out of the entire array. Some organizations can measure it through the MITRE ATT&CK lens. Mm-hmm. Some organizations might look at it from the CIS lens, obviously from the Defender side. Compliance has a big important angle to it, obviously, because you need to report to your auditor that you're monitoring properly and nothing is broken. The second question is, should something happen? Should something broke? How fast would I identify it, and how fast would I be able to fix it? Mm-hmm. This revolves, it kind of walk along the lines of vulnerabilities. vulnerabilities happen, right? It's a question of how fast do I respond? How fast do I patch? How fast do I put compensating controls around it? And, around the SLA, right? So this is a second very important question, like time to fix these issues, because every minute that this issue isn't fixed, you have a blind spot. And finally, it's asking about priorities. How much do I know about my detections, from the most critical ones to the least critical ones? And this revolves around my resources. Okay, and what I was talking earlier about, if you can do something, if you can monitor for something, monitor it in the most critical detections. Okay, let's say you have a specific amount of resources, and you want to kind of distribute it to your detection array. Make sure you have the most focus on the critical ones first, and then kind of break it down and narrow it down to the other levels of urgency or severity for the detections. We do realize that without a proper solution to help you with, there's some engineering work that needs to be done. We really believe that you got to look for it. You got to monitor for it. You got to be on top of it. And if you can do anything, you need to start prioritizing from your critical detections. This is also how you're reflecting upper management that you have the right focuses. With have this resources. This is how I'm distributing it to my most critical detections. And there's some level of to that point. There's also a level of how continuous is it? How often do I check my critical detections? How often do I check my high severity detections, and so on and so forth? This is also questions of resource. How urgent it is to know on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on an hourly basis that my high value detections are working.
Yeah. What do you find is like the average team's rate of checking these things, like based on the resources they have?
So for a start, for most teams, it's not continuous. When I'm saying continuous, less than a monthly basis. Oftentimes, it's either being done on a quarterly basis, semi-annual basis, or an annual basis. Some advanced teams run purple teaming exercise. Coming in from Simulate, we've been seeing a lot of teams that are running it. The problem is with purple teaming exercises is that you'll run as an attack simulation. You'll see an alert isn't triggering, but that's it. Now you need to understand why. And oftentimes, just having the resource to investigate every silent failure is a lot to handle. And so it really depends on the amount of resources that is available for the security engineering team. Sometimes we see some outsource assessments being done. Also, mostly around the high critical alerts, because it's very expensive to do it for the entire detection array, being done by somebody, right? But this is kind of like what we're saying.
Yeah. That kind of hits on two questions I wanted to ask based on the three things that you had posed there. First one being, like, how do you test and how often do you test? And you already hit, purple teaming and kind of checking on some of those things. Are there any other methods that you would recommend for people to go back and use to check these on a more frequent basis, or to make that more easy?
First of all, there's FIG.
And
it's kind of like one of the core challenges we set out to solve without building something on your own, which can be a challenge. Second, building point validations like data validations in specific part of the pipeline. There are some point monitoring and point validation that some of the vendors are offering. Being able to kind of connect the dots where something that's failing here might be connected to a failure over there, and what do I need to do in order to fix it? Sometimes even just knowing that there is a problem, that's the first step for solutions. So looking more around these areas of failure loggings and error loggings in your existing tools. We've been seeing some cool implementations coming from like open source for point monitoring. Those are very good first steps, and you need to take the first step.
Yeah,
right. That's kind of like.
The other thing I wanted to ask on that is, as you are building and expanding and changing your environment, how do you tackle staying on top of, and what kind of challenges are created as you are, going into a new cloud platform, delivering new custom applications, right? Like, where do people get themselves into trouble there?
Yeah. So again, mostly it's around ingesting new types of data sources, changing data streams and ingestion, expanding sources coverage, and these has an extensive effect on the detection array at the end of the day. Imagine yourself that you have a specific pipe that's built for a specific stream of data. Now you're tripling it, and all of a sudden this pipe breaks.
Yeah.
Or you built for specific types of data, and now different forms of that data came in from other places through that pipe, and now you think your detection should be covering those sources as well, but because they came with different structures, even though it's the same source, the detection won't trigger on top of it. So there's a lot of different tweaking to do in order to handle every source. Even if you already ingested data from this vendor, from that type of product, it's the specific deployment in your environment that could affect it. And again, the first step is identify that there is a problem. What we often see again at Fig is that you need to, oftentimes there's a problem that's being flagged, but like understanding what's going to be the root cause for it, and especially what's going to be what's going to be the fix that would solve this. This is already a challenge that, again, we at Fig set out to solve, to allow engineers to stay focused on security rather than deployment.
Yeah. One scenario that pops up a lot, especially with students, is they might not be running their entire set of security tools. Someone else is managing their infrastructure, at least partially for them. Any suggestions on what people in that situation maybe could ask if they have an MDR, an MSSP? Like, how can they make sure they're doing their job to have none of this happen?
Amazing. And so it returns to the questions of resilience, like to those three questions that, you can ask internally, but you can also ask the MDR that manages your environment. Like, how do you monitor for the different issues? How do you know if my detections are working properly, the detections that you're running for me? B, how fast would you be able to identify a silent failure or any failure and fix it? Oftentimes looking at it, from the SLA perspective. And finally, how do I look at it from the detection criticality perspective? And that's perfectly fine because there's different levels of support that MDRs are providing to their clients. You need to be very aware of what is the level of support that you're getting from your MDR, and in correlation to that, what should you expect? And so if you have a very high level of support in your contract with your MDR, it's important to get that level of visibility to, I know that when there's an alert, you're reporting to me, you're giving me what I need to do in order to respond to it. But if there was silence, I want to know it was silence because I wasn't attacked and not because something broke.
Yeah.
And having those assurances from the MDR, by the way, is really helpful also for continuing the discussion internally on working with the MDR and trusting it, and continuing working with that vendor.
Yeah, you could probably test them yourself too, to some extent, right? If you really wanted to, you could maybe push them and like turn off one of your things and see if they say anything.
Oh,
right?
100%. By the way, we got it a lot from back at Simulate, where clients used to run purple teaming exercises with the MDR to see that the MDR is actually responding. I did, like, picking it up. And it happened a few times, and the MDRs our clients worked with are actually pretty amazing. We identify, pick it up, and say, "Hey, dear client, we just identified very suspicious activity in your environment." It's like, good, great. It was me testing you, and you passed the test. Amazing. So it's important, because at the end of the day, when you're working with an MDR, you need to have the confidence in its resilience.
Yeah.
It's a monitoring and response team, right? It's just not your own, but it keeps it watches your six, right?
Yeah, you're outsourcing the technical detection, but not the responsibility ultimately. So You're putting that trust in their camp and hoping they're covering that kind of stuff for you. Yeah. Anything else we didn't cover on the kind of resilience or log and telemetry health kind of topic that you think is a really important thing for listeners to know?
I think maybe I think we covered everything, in my opinion. I think if we're talking about takeaways, that's important to take away from our discussion is it's important to understand that the SecOps infrastructure is the foundation of the organization for being able to detect and respond to threats, right? That's the beating heart of the security organization. Knowing it's working, having the assurance that it's working, and if not, being able to identify what's the problem and fix it. It's not an engineering problem. That's a security problem, right? And first of all, having that level of understanding and acceptance that this is a security problem is the first step for starting to solve for this problem. Second, it's important to look at the different levels of the problem at the different points that the data is going through, because at each point, and in every level, there could be a problem that could affect detection and response. And it might be a journey to start covering everything, but you need to take the first step. Look at the data flow, validate your detections, take it from an annual exercise to a semi-annual, and go and move towards solutions that help you. Obviously, with covering it fast and give you that peace of mind about the resilience and efficacy of your environment. This is really the first step towards SOC modernization, because if you can trust your foundation today, you can definitely advance to the SOC of the future in a way.
Excellent. Yeah, I love that approach. Understanding what is your most important data, right? Priorities, looking at your entire pipeline and knowing where that data comes from, saying what could go wrong at every single step, kind of doing that threat model of sorts, only it's for your data pipeline, right? It's almost the exact same kind of process. And then, making sure that you have the answer to the question, what happens and how will I know if something breaks here? Yeah, very logical approach. Love it. Where can listeners find you and get in contact if they want to?
So fig.security is our website. Reach out. My email is nir@fig.security. Reach out if you have any questions. Leave a note in our website. Come see a demo. And we really very much like to hear from the listeners, from the practitioners, from the pains. We came to solve that pain, from the root. And we'd very much to hear. We're very much keen to hear. What are you experiencing? Have you experienced anything that we just talked about today? And how can we take you from doing the plumbing to doing really focusing on security? So,
awesome, perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me here. And we'll get resources in the show notes. We'll get that information in there. And if anyone's interested, they know how to reach out. So
amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
it was amazing.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for joining Blueprint, and we will catch you later. So what have we learned? Telemetry health sits at the ground floor of your detection program. And if the data isn't arriving correctly, none of that logic on top of it matters. The key takeaway from this conversation: treat your pipeline like a threat surface. Map it, monitor it at the schema level, prioritize your most critical detection dependencies, and make sure you can answer the question, if something breaks here, how fast would I know? Thanks to Nir and the FIG security team for sponsoring this episode. Links and resources are in the show notes. I'm John, and I'll see you on the next episode of Blueprint.